Then we need another way. There's supplements that we can use.
Nobody can dictate it.
Nobody can dictate it. Not even autopsy. We need to act fast now.
I know there's something fishy between both of them.
Betrayed and poisoned, his cook became his only savior. Nobody ever suspects the person who cooks their food. That's what makes it the perfect crime. And it's exactly why Ruth Dawson caught it before it was too late. What she found in that kitchen that morning would have killed her boss within the hour, and the person behind it was someone who claimed to love him. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we bring you true-to-life stories every single week about betrayal, loyalty, and the people who quietly do the right thing when everyone else has given up on doing right at all. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, because today's story is one you will not forget. This is the story of Ruth Dawson, a 54-year-old cook from Charleston, South Carolina, and the day she saved the life of the man who had given her a second chance, a man his own wife wanted dead. Ruth Dawson had been cooking in the Bennett household for almost 11 years. She started when she was 43, freshly divorced, with 2 grown children who had moved out of state and a small apartment on the edge of downtown Charleston that she could barely afford on her own. She had worked in diners most of her life, flipping eggs and pouring coffee for truck drivers and tourists. But when a friend told her that Harold Bennett, a well-known real estate developer, was looking for a private cook for his home on Sullivan's Island, she jumped at the chance without a second thought. Harold Bennett was 58 years old at the time this story takes place. He had built his fortune from nothing, starting with a single rundown property he flipped in his 20s, and growing it, brick by brick, deal by deal, into one of the largest real estate portfolios in the Lowcountry. He was a tall man, silver-haired, always dressed sharp even on his days off, the kind of man who shook your hand and looked you in the eye when he spoke to you. He wasn't perfect, he worked too much, and he had been lonely for a long time after his first wife passed away from cancer 8 years earlier. But he was kind to his staff, generous with his time, and he trusted people easily, sometimes too easily. 3 years before this story begins, Harold remarried. Her name was Vanessa Cole, 38 years old, a former real estate agent he had met at a charity gala in downtown Charleston. She was beautiful, sharp-tongued, always polished, the kind of woman who turned heads the moment she walked into a room. Harold fell for her fast. Some of the staff at the house, including Ruth, had their doubts from the very beginning, but nobody said anything. It wasn't their place, or so they believed. For the first year of the marriage, things seemed fine on the surface. Vanessa redecorated the house, threw parties, traveled with Harold to Aspen and to the Bahamas, and played the role of the doting wife whenever cameras or guests were around. But behind closed doors, Ruth noticed things. Small things at first. Vanessa would disappear for hours in the afternoon and come back smelling of unfamiliar cologne. She would take calls in the pool house with the door locked, lowering her voice the moment anyone walked near. She started asking Ruth strange questions too, questions about Harold's medications, about his blood pressure, about what foods interacted badly with his heart medicine. Ruth answered honestly at first, thinking nothing of it. A wife should know these things about her husband, shouldn't she? It was Harold's longtime driver, a man named Walter Briggs, who first planted the seed of suspicion in Ruth's mind. Walter had been driving for Harold for almost 15 years, long before Vanessa ever entered the picture. One evening, after dropping Vanessa off at a spa in Mount Pleasant, Walter mentioned to Ruth, almost in passing, that he had picked her up from that same spa 3 times that month, but the receptionist told him Vanessa never actually had an appointment booked. She was meeting someone there. A man. Ruth didn't say anything to Harold. What proof did she have? A comment from a driver, a receptionist's confusion. None of it was solid. And besides, it wasn't her business to interfere in a marriage. She kept her head down, did her job, and told herself it wasn't her place to get involved in things that could cost her the only steady income she had. But then, 6 months before the poisoning, things escalated. Ruth began noticing Vanessa spending increasing amounts of time with a man named Marcus Kane, Harold's own business attorney, a smooth-talking lawyer who had handled Bennett Properties' legal matters for nearly a decade. Marcus was younger than Harold by almost 20 years, charming in the way that made people trust him instantly, and married himself to a woman named Diane Kane, who Ruth had met once at a company holiday party and genuinely liked. At first, Ruth assumed the meetings between Vanessa and Marcus were business-related. After all, Vanessa had taken on more responsibility managing some of Harold's rental properties. But then she noticed the way Vanessa's phone would buzz constantly during dinner, the way she'd smile secretly at the screen, before quickly turning it face down. She noticed Vanessa's perfume changing, becoming more intentional, more youthful. She noticed the new lingerie in the laundry that Vanessa never wore around the house. She noticed, most of all, the growing coldness between Vanessa and Harold, the way Vanessa's eyes would go flat and irritated whenever Harold tried to embrace her, and how quickly her expression would shift back to warmth the moment she remembered someone might be watching. Ruth wasn't the only one who noticed. The head housekeeper, a woman named Donna Myers who had worked at the estate even longer than Ruth, mentioned it once over coffee in the staff kitchen. "That woman's got somewhere else her heart's living," Donna said quietly one morning, stirring sugar into her mug. "Mark my words, Ruth, something's not right in that marriage, and it's not Mr. Bennett's doing." Ruth agreed but said nothing more. Still, she started watching more closely. Not because she wanted to pry, but because something in her gut told her that Harold Bennett, a man who had given her steady work, decent pay, health insurance for the first time in her adult life, and treated her with more respect than most of her family ever had, deserved better than what was happening behind his back. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon in early October. Harold had gone to Colombia for 2 nights on business, leaving Vanessa alone at the Sullivan's Island estate. Ruth had stayed late to prep meals for the rest of the week, something she often did when Harold traveled, since Vanessa rarely cooked for herself. Around 8 in the evening, Ruth realized she'd left her reading glasses in the pantry near the wine cellar, a chilled little room just off the main kitchen where Harold kept his collection of bourbons and aged wines. When she went to retrieve them, she heard voices. She froze at the door. It was Vanessa's voice, low and urgent, and a man's voice responding. Marcus Kane's voice, unmistakable. Ruth stood frozen for a long moment, torn between walking away and staying to listen. In the end, her instincts told her to stay. "He's not going to sign it," Vanessa was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "He told me himself, he's not changing the will. Not without talking to his lawyer first. His real lawyer, not you." "Then we need another way," Marcus replied, his voice calm, businesslike, almost clinical. "You said he's been having chest pains again." "He has. His doctor already warned him about his heart." "It wouldn't take much." Ruth's stomach dropped. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the pantry, barely breathing. "There's a supplement," Marcus continued, quieter now. "Something that would look completely natural. No autopsy would ever catch it, if it's timed right with his existing condition. I have a contact who can get it discreetly, untraceable. And you're sure it won't come back on us? Not if we're careful. Not if it looks like his heart simply gave out one night. Nobody questions a sick, overworked man in his 50s dying of a heart attack, Vanessa. Nobody." There was a pause, then the soft, unmistakable sound of a kiss, followed by Vanessa's voice again, colder now than Ruth had ever heard it. "Good, because I am done waiting. I want my life back, Marcus, and I want everything that comes with it." Ruth backed away from the pantry door as quietly as she could, her heart slamming against her ribs, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped her glasses on the tile floor. She made it back to the kitchen, gripped the edge of the counter, and stood there for a long moment just trying to breathe. She wanted to believe she had misheard. She wanted to believe it was some kind of dark joke, some twisted business talk that had nothing to do with what it sounded like. But deep down, in the part of her that had survived a hard life and learned to trust her gut over her hopes, she knew exactly what she had just heard. Vanessa Bennett and Marcus Kane were planning to kill Harold. That night, Ruth didn't sleep. She turned the conversation over in her mind again and again, replaying every word, every pause, every icy tone in Vanessa's voice. She thought about going to the police immediately, but what would she tell them? That she overheard a conversation about a supplement and a heart condition. It would sound paranoid, even absurd without proof. Worse, if she was wrong, or if Vanessa found out Ruth had been listening, she could lose her job, her home, everything she had worked so hard to rebuild after her divorce. And if she was right and did nothing, Harold Bennett could end up dead. Ruth decided she needed proof before she said a single word to anyone. She thought of Walter, the driver, and decided he was the only person on staff she trusted enough to bring into this. The next morning, she found him in the garage, polishing the chrome trim on Harold's car, and told him everything she had heard the night before. Walter's face went pale as she spoke. "I knew something wasn't right with that spa business," he muttered when she finished. "But murder, Ruth? You're sure that's what they said?" "I'm sure," Ruth said firmly. "Word for word, Walter. She wants him dead, and she wants Marcus Kane's help to do it, and make it look natural." Walter rubbed the back of his neck, thinking hard. "We can't just go to Mr. Bennett with this. If we're wrong, we're both out of a job, and if we're right, we tip our hand before we've got any evidence. So what do? We watch," Walter said, "closely, and the second we see anything at all, we act." For the next several weeks, Ruth and Walter kept a careful, quiet watch. Ruth paid closer attention to anything that came into the kitchen that she hadn't personally purchased or prepared. Supplements, powders, teas, anything Vanessa might try to introduce into Harold's food or drink without Ruth's knowledge. Walter kept track of Vanessa's movements, noting every time she left the estate and where she went, cross-referencing it quietly with receipts and gas station stops. It was nearly a month later, in mid-November, that Ruth found what she had been dreading. She was organizing the pantry shelves one afternoon when she noticed a small, unlabeled jar tucked behind a row of Harold's protein powders. Powders he took every morning in his smoothie, a habit his doctor had actually recommended for his cholesterol. The jar contained a fine white powder, nearly identical in color and texture to the protein supplement itself, but slightly different in smell, faintly bitter, almost chemical. Ruth's hands shook as she carefully sealed the jar in a plastic bag without touching the contents directly, wrapping it in a kitchen towel and hiding it in her own bag to take home that evening. She didn't tell Vanessa she had found anything. She smiled, made dinner as usual, and left the house that night with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give out before Harold's ever would. That night, Ruth called her nephew, a young man named Tyler Dawson who worked as a lab technician at a hospital in North Charleston. She didn't tell him everything, only that she needed a favor, and needed it kept quiet. Tyler agreed to run an informal test on the substance the next day, using equipment at the hospital lab during his lunch break, purely as a personal favor, though he warned her that anything conclusive would eventually need to go through proper legal channels if her suspicions were confirmed. 2 days later, Tyler called Ruth with results that confirmed her worst fears. The substance in the jar was a concentrated form of a heart medication interaction compound, something that, combined with Harold's existing prescription and his known cardiac condition, could trigger a fatal cardiac event that would appear, to any coroner unfamiliar with the specific combination, to be a natural heart attack. It was exactly what Marcus Kane had described in that pantry conversation weeks earlier. Untraceable, natural-looking, deadly. Ruth barely made it through her shift the next day without breaking down. She knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that Vanessa Bennett intended to kill her husband, and that the poison, because that's exactly what it was likely already being introduced into his morning smoothies in small, careful doses, slowly weakening his heart over time to make his eventual death appear to be the natural result of years of stress and poor health, rather than the sudden, singular event it would actually be. That evening, Ruth and Walter met privately in the garage after Vanessa had left for what she claimed was a dinner with friends in downtown Charleston. Ruth showed Walter the lab results on her nephew's printed report. Walter's jaw tightened as he read it. "We have to tell him," Walter said, "tonight, before he touches that smoothie again tomorrow morning." "And if she catches us?" Ruth asked. "If she finds out before we get to him, then we make sure she doesn't," Walter replied firmly. "Ruth, this isn't a game anymore. This is his life." They agreed that Ruth would speak to Harold directly the following morning, before Vanessa woke up, using the excuse of an early kitchen delivery to get him alone. Neither of them slept much that night, and Ruth spent hours rehearsing exactly how she would explain what she had heard and found, without sounding like a woman who had lost her mind. The next morning, Harold came down to the kitchen earlier than usual, dressed for an early meeting downtown. Ruth's hands trembled as she poured his coffee, debating one final time whether to actually go through with it. But then she thought of Diane Kane, Marcus's wife, who had no idea her husband was helping plan a murder. She thought of Harold's grown daughter from his first marriage, who called the house every Sunday to check in on her father. She thought of everything Harold had given her, the steady paycheck, the health insurance, the simple dignity of being treated like a person and not just hired help, and she knew she couldn't stay silent, no matter the risk to herself. "Mr. Bennett," Ruth said quietly, setting his coffee down in front of him at the kitchen island. "I need to speak with you about something serious, and I need you to trust that everything I'm about to tell you is the truth, even if it's hard to hear." Harold looked up at her, immediately noticing the gravity in her expression. "Ruth, you look like you haven't slept in days. What's wrong?" Ruth took a deep breath, and then, as calmly and clearly as she could manage, she told him everything. The conversation she had overheard in the wine pantry, the jar of powder hidden behind his protein supplements, the lab results her nephew had run, confirming it was a substance capable of triggering a fatal heart event disguised as a natural death. She told him about Marcus Kane, about the affair, about the words Vanessa had used, that she was done waiting, that she wanted her life back, and everything that came with it. Harold sat in complete silence for what felt like several minutes after Ruth finished speaking. His face had gone pale, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles turned white. Finally he spoke, his voice low and unsteady. "Show me," he said simply. "Show me everything." Ruth retrieved the sealed jar from where she had hidden it and handed Harold the lab report from her nephew. He read through it twice, his expression shifting from disbelief to something colder, harder, more resolved. When he finally looked up at Ruth, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "I need you to understand something, Ruth," he said. "I don't take this lightly, what you've just told me. If this is true, and everything you've shown me suggests it is, you have just saved my life. Do you understand that?" Ruth nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "But we're not going to handle this quietly," Harold continued. "We're not going to sweep this under the rug or handle it as a private family matter. If what you're telling me is true, my wife and my own attorney have been planning to murder me for money, and that is not something that ends with a quiet divorce and a signed settlement. That ends with handcuffs." That same morning, Harold contacted a private investigator he had used years earlier for a business matter, a retired detective named Frank Odom, who had a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. Frank came to the estate within hours, reviewed the lab results, examined the jar of powder, and took a full statement from Ruth about everything she had heard and seen. He then brought in a colleague still active with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, a detective named Angela Ruiz, who specialized in cases involving domestic conspiracy and financial motive crimes. Detective Ruiz moved quickly and carefully. Rather than confronting Vanessa or Marcus immediately, which risked them destroying evidence or fleeing, she recommended a controlled operation. Harold, working with the detectives, agreed to continue his normal routine for several more days, while law enforcement quietly built their case, wiretapping Marcus Kane's office phone with a judge's approval based on the initial evidence Ruth and Tyler had provided, and placing discreet surveillance on both Vanessa and Marcus's movements. Within a week, investigators had recorded multiple additional conversations between Vanessa and Marcus discussing the timeline for Harold's death, references to an insurance policy Vanessa had quietly increased just 4 months into their marriage, and detailed discussions about how quickly Vanessa planned to liquidate certain properties once she inherited Harold's estate. They also uncovered financial records, showing Marcus had been secretly transferring funds from several of Bennett Properties' accounts into an offshore account he and Vanessa planned to access together once Harold was gone. Meaning this wasn't only a plot fueled by infidelity and impatience, but one motivated by greed on a scale far larger than anyone initially realized. On a Thursday morning in early December, exactly 6 weeks after Ruth first overheard that conversation in the wine pantry, Charleston County detectives arrested Vanessa Bennett at the Sullivan's Island estate and Marcus Kane at his downtown law office simultaneously. Vanessa was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and multiple counts of financial fraud related to the embezzlement from Bennett Properties. Marcus faced identical charges, along with additional counts related to his breach of fiduciary duty as Harold's attorney. Harold Bennett rewarded and compensated Ruth Dawson in a special way she never expected, because without her, Vanessa and her lover could have sent him to his early grave. In following week, Harold Bennett handed brand new canteen over to Ruth Dawson to thank her for saving his life, and celebrated her throughout the province. Tell us your mind what you feel about this story, and please don't forget to subscribe.